Welcome back, everyone, and today we are going to be doing a deck tech for Magda, Brazen Outlaw, and it's going to be Dwarves and Dragons, just a little tribal thing. So Magda says your other dwarves get +1/+0 whenever a dwarf is tapped. You make a treasure, and then you can sack 5 treasures to search your deck for an artifact or dragon card and just put it straight on the field. So the game plan is to basically play as many dwarves as possible, then tap them by either attacking or crewing vehicles we're going to toss on the deck. Then we're going to make a lot of treasure for extra mana or to just sacrifice to Magda, primarily sacrificing to Magda, but the good utility is still there from the treasure. We're going to get a big scary dragon or artifact, and then we're going to win the game. It's going to go off pretty fast. It is a pretty fast deck. So let's start it off. Academy Manufacturer. If you would make a clue, food, or treasure, make one of each. We're going to be making a lot of treasures, so we're just going to be making clue and food along with it just for extra value. Axard Cavalry, it's a dwarf. We can tap it right away. We can give another creature haste, so it's kind of a 2-for-1 because it taps itself, and we can give something else haste to also tap. And we have Blightsteel Colossus right in the head. Trample, Infect, it's an 11/11. Blightsteel Colossus is an absolute menace. He's going to be one of the big scary artifacts we're going to be getting if we just want to close out the game. Next, we have Drakuseth, Maul of the Flames. With flying, and whenever Drakuseth attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target and 3 damage to each of up to 2 other targets. So basically, deal 4 damage to something and then bolt 2 other things. Then we're going to have Dwarven Blast Miner. He's a dwarf. He can also tap himself, and just destroying a non-basic land is fun anyways. So that's a way we can tap him. Morph isn't really relevant, but it's just there if we want. Dwarven Blood Boiler, 3 mana, 2/3. Tap an untapped dwarf you control. Target creature gets +2/+0 until the end of turn. These kinds of effects are good because we can just, at the end of someone else's turn, if we don't have something we could crew, we could just like tap our dwarves right away and still make treasures on the end step or in response to something and get those 5 treasures to sacrifice them at instant speed. It's just good value. Dwarven Miner, again, he's a dwarf that he just destroys a non-basic land when he taps. Dwarven Recruiter, when he comes into play, search your library for any number of dwarf cards, reveal them, and then shuffle them and put them on top of your library. Honestly, we don't want to get too many dwarves, but it is good to be able to stack our deck. Fearless Liberator, he is a dwarf and he makes more dwarfs. That's really all. That's really it. He just makes more dwarfs. Gadrak, the Crown Scourge. We're going to be making a lot of treasure, and he can't attack unless we control 4 or more artifacts, which is the treasure, and then at the beginning of our end step, create a treasure for each non-token creature that died this turn. So basically, if our commander is a dead on board commander, just Magda is flat out dead on board. If we play Magda and she dies, we can at least be able to get some extra value from our creatures dying and turn them into artifacts. Plus, it's a 3 mana 5/4 with flying. 5/4 with flying. Big Scary Goldspan Dragon, 5 mana 4/4, flying haste. Whenever he attacks or becomes the target of a spell, make a treasure, and then your treasure is tapped for 2 instead of 1. He doubles up our treasure. He's fantastic. Hellkite Tyrant is a funny little win con. Flying Trample. When he deals combat to a player, gain control of all artifacts that player controls. That effect is good enough on its own. However, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. So if we can get a lot of treasure and just have him out, it could just be a funny little meme to instantly win the game. Plus, we could steal our opponent's soul rings and whatever their good rocks have, whatever good rocks they have. Leyline Tyrant, it's not a big scary dragon. It is mono red, so I do like the idea of basically making it so we can tap out at the end of our opponent's like end step when it goes to our turns and still be able to retain that red mana. And if he does die, like we are just going to be able to deal a ton. He's just like a little mana resource. There's not really much ramp in mono red. Metallic Mimic, I like for 2 reasons. Because you could honestly say dragon or dwarf. I put it in specifically for dwarf, but you could say either or. It basically makes your dwarves or dragons enter with a 1/1 counter on it. Meteor Golem, 7 mana 3/3. That's a rough rate, but when he enters, destroy target non-land permanent an opponent controls. I don't see us really hard casting him. The way I kind of view it is we're going to sacrifice 5 treasures and we're going to whip him straight into play. And honestly, we make a ton of mana in this deck. We could hard cast him, but the idea is instant speed. We could sacrifice 5 treasures and get some instant removal going on. Plundering Barbarian. He's a dwarf, but I like the idea of having a little modal thing. So when he enters, we can pop an artifact, or we can just make a treasure. So he's like a little 2-for-1. That's why I like him. So I put him in here. 7 dwarves. This is I put 7 of them in here. We have 7 of the 7 dwarves, all 7. They're 2-mana 2/2s that get +1/+1. So at best, they're like a 2-mana 8/8. Um, but they're dwarves. I just like the flavor of them. They're not super great. Like you really need a bunch of them to like make them worthwhile. Like more often than not, since we have a 100 card deck, it's gonna be like a 2-mana 3/3 that will tap and make us treasure. That could get incrementally bigger. I don't know. I like them. I like them. Steel Hellkite, 6-mana 5/5, flying. We can pay 2 mana to pump it, or we can pay X, destroy each non-land permanent with mana value X whose controller was dealt damage by Steel Hellkite this turn. Activated only once per turn. I like this ability a lot because we basically pick an opponent and it has flying, so it's evasion. We attack, they're going to take damage, and then we look at their board and say, well, what do we want to get rid of? We can get rid of all of their 1-drops, 2-drops, 3-drops, 4-drops, whatever, right? Or, even if we don't want to do that, we're always going to say X is 0, so we can pop any kind of tokens they have as a worst case. Stormkiln Artist. We don't have a ton of instants and sorceries. Like, frankly, we really just don't. He's a 4-mana 2/2, but we have enough where I thought he could be good. But since he does get +1/+0 for each artifact we control, he is like an annoying like thing to block. And we are still just gonna get treasure. He is a dwarf, so we're gonna tap him still. Terror of the Peaks, 5 mana. Spells are annoying to target him. And then whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to anything. It's just good. We are a pretty creature-heavy deck, so this is some good burn. This is some good removal when we need it. And plus, like, he is a 5-mana pseudo ward 5/4. Like, he's still pretty good. Torbrand, Thane of the Fell. He is a dwarf himself, which is very good. And basically, our red sources deal +2 damage constantly. I like Torbrand a lot. I'm very biased because I personally have a Torbrand EDH deck and I love him. But again, our main win con is straight up just attacking with our creatures. And if we can make our creatures be essentially +2 and all our effects that deal damage be +2, it's only going to make the game close out a little bit faster. Tyrant's Familiar. Ideally, we always have Magda. Like, we want to keep Magda on the field as much as possible. So Flying Haste, 5/5 for 7. It's rough, but ideally we can cheese it out with some treasure. So Lieutenant, as long as you control your commander, it gets +2/+2 and has, when it attacks, it deals 7 damage to target creature defending player controls. 7 damage basically kills most creatures. Like, it's gonna take care of most things. So it's good removal. It's like swinging in for 7 damage with haste. It's a good card overall. Vault Robber, I like him. He's a dwarf, so he's a little 2-for-1. So you pay 1 and you tap him. You exile a card from your graveyard. We're not getting cards back, so it doesn't matter anyway. So you tap him, you make a mana from Magda, and then you exile a creature card from your graveyard to make another one. So you're basically paying 1 mana for 2 treasure. So it does pay for itself. Zorn, if we make a treasure, we make 2 instead. That's really it. Well, I guess technically it's if we would make 1 or more treasure, instead we create those tokens plus an additional. So I guess we don't really have any effects that make multiple treasure. So it's still good though. We have 2 sorceries. Gamble, which is just you gamble for a card, it's gamble, and Vandablast. Going through the deck, the only other card I was going to add to this was a Blasphemous Act, which basically does 13 damage to each creature, and it costs, like, not that much mana. But I decided against it because of how susceptible our deck is to nukes. How we don't really have any kind of recursion, and that we don't want to blow up our field, because ideally we want to have the biggest, scariest field at all time, because we're going to be able to get there with our treasure. With Vandablast, 5 mana, destroy all artifacts you don't control. Instance. I decided to put in a Braid. One, because we're in mono red and we don't have a ton of, like, very, very good, like, removal, like, things. We can destroy artifacts easy, and we can burn easy. And I decided to put in a braid because I like the idea of having those two like mashed into one. And anyone that has played standard or even modern, honestly, can tell you a braid is very annoying and good. Chaos Warp. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into his or her library, then reveals the top card of his or her library. If it's a permanent card, he or she puts it on the battlefield. Basically, you just shuffle a permanent into its controller's deck. They shuffle their deck, they flip the top card of their deck, and if it's a permanent, they play it. Generally, Chaos Warp is good. It can be bad. I've seen it be very bad. I've seen Chaos Warp flip away like an Oracle of Moldiah and hit like an Eldrazi Titan. Like it happens, but more often than not, it's you do it and you hit a land. Like you get rid of a problematic thing and you get a land. And the thing I like about it is it's target permanent. So it just gets rid of anything. Deflecting SWAT. If you control a commander, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost. You may choose new abilities for target spell or ability. I like this card because ideally, since Magda costs so little, I would like to have her on the field at all time. And if someone does try to destroy Magda or does try to like mess with our things, we can always just like make that not happen for free. And even if we don't have Magda, it's just a 3 mana. Like that's the general going rate for those kinds of cards, anyways. Instance. Again, man, just ignore that. Take a drink. Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast. They are the same exact card. Counter target spell if it's blue, or destroy target permanent if it's blue. Now you may be wondering, these cards are no good unless you're going against a blue deck. Well, the way I kind of look at these is I put them in my red decks, my mono red decks at least, is more often than not, you are going to be playing against a deck that is blue. I mean, you can look at statistically, blue is one of the most popular colors to have in a commander deck. And just being able to counter, like 1 mana, counter someone's commander or destroy their commander or destroy whatever that's blue is very good. Now we can look at the flip side. The worst case scenario, and I've seen it happen, is you're not going against anything that is blue, and it is a dead spell. That's the worst case, but more often than not, Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast are very good. And we do have cards like Thrill Possibility where we could like they're not worthless, like you could make so many arguments about them. Like you could say just simply having it in your hand makes your opponent like it's like, well, they always have something. Like why aren't they playing that one card? Or we could use it to Throw a Possibility, discard a card and draw 2 cards, which is very good at instant speed. It's good. It's just good. It's hard to make a case for it, but more often than not, you are going to be going in a pod, assuming a pod of 4 people. More often than not, you're going to be playing against a blue deck. Unexpected Windfall. As an additional cost, discard a card, draw 2 cards, and create 2 treasure tokens. If we look back, it's basically just a super thrill possibility. That's really it. And then our final instant, which is also a land, is Valakut Awakening, which is 3 mana. Put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library, then draw that many cards +1. So we basically just get to hard filter our hands, or we could just play it as a land. And then the land, I decided not to add it just because the land is simply just enters tapped and it can tap for a red. But as does all of the rare lands from Valakut with the same cycle are. Or not Valakut, Zendikar. Let's look at artifacts. Artifacts are another big portion of the deck because Magda gets dragons or artifacts. Let's talk about them. Arcane Signet, it's just a mana rock. It's just a good mana rock. It's a 2 mana. It'll tap for a red. It's just a little bit of ramp. Conqueror's Galleon. I'm going to make the point about these now. The reason we're going to run a lot of vehicles, and the reason is because crew. So if you read the bottom, crew, tap any number of creatures you control with total power 4 or more. This vehicle becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. The interesting thing about these kinds of cards, crew, you can tap your creatures into crew, even if they don't amount to, let's say, crew 4, right? You can also hard exceed that number. You could tap your entire field of dwarves and crew potentially like 20 or whatever, and it'll still be fine. You could also, while it still is a creature, you could crew it uh, while it still is a creature, which is good if you want to block and then also make extra mana. So the thing is, guys, I can't elaborate enough. The deck is about tapping dwarves and getting big artifacts and dragons. And crew is just a way where we can tap our dwarves at instant speed and get good value from them. So, for example, Conqueror's Galleon, 4 mana, a 2/10. When it attacks, exile it at the end of combat, then return it to the battlefield, and it becomes a land, which I have on the right. Again, this isn't like going to be like, oh, we're going to hit you for a ton. It's not going to die because it's a 2/10. But it's going to flip into Trading Post. We can tap it to add a mana. We could pay 2, draw a card, then discard a card. We could pay 4 to just draw a card. Or we could pay 6 to return target card from your graveyard to your hand. We don't have a lot of recursion. I'm not even going to argue and say that this is like a viable form of recursion, because it is essentially, since you're losing the mana, it is essentially 7 mana to get a card from your grave to your hand. But it's just good to have a modal land where, like, oh, we can just draw a card if we need to. We can loot if we need to. It offers us good things. Consulate Dreadnought. It's a crew 6, which is high, but it's a 1 mana 7/11, which I think is just kind of funny. And I think it's good because like we could just like crew up, tap our boys, and it's a great blocker because no one because we can turn our 3/2 into a 7/11 that's not gonna die. Like it's just good. Dermotaxi is a new card, and I like the idea of it. So as it enters the battlefield, exile a creature card from your graveyard, and then you tap. It doesn't even have crew. Just tap 2 untapped creatures you control. Dermotaxi becomes a copy of the exiled card, except it's a vehicle. So in my head, when I put this card in, the exiled cards we're going to have are going to be like Goldspan Dragon. It's going to be like Dracuseth. It's going to be like whatever, right? It's going to be a good card. We're going to get good attack value on. What's that one dragon? Like Legions or Lieutenant's Familiar, the big 7/7 dragon. Heraldic Banner. 3 mana. We're going to say red. Red creatures get +1/+0 and it taps for a red. It's just good, especially because we're in a pretty go-wide deck, as most tribal decks often are. It's just good. It's a rock, and it's like a lord. Lightning Greaves, we're just going to toss them on Magda. That's really it. Like, having haste isn't that big of a deal, but Shroud is definitely a big deal. We don't have really anything that's going to specifically target Magda. Mazquid Nexus. I like this card a lot. 4 mana. Creatures you control are every creature type. The same is true for creatures you control that are creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. Basically, everything is a dwarf, which is very good because now your dragons, when you attack, and your vehicles are now dwarves, which make even more treasure, which helps you out. We can also just pay 3 mana and make a 2/2 dwarf. Very good. Mox Amber, I usually don't add in. I look at Mox Amber as a pretty competitive card, and I don't think this is a competitive deck because it's literally dwarf tribal. Mox Amber, 0 mana. Add 1 mana of any color among legendary creatures and planeswalkers you control. I put this in just because it's a free spell, and Magda comes in so fast, and like since we're gonna want to always have Magda, it's just a free extra mana. Obelisk of Erd. Convoke. Your creatures can help cast this spell. Each creature you tap while casting the spell pays for 1 or more of that mana. So we could potentially just tap 6 of our guys, which is going to make us 6 treasures anyways, so it really doesn't matter. And we're going to say dwarf, and then our dwarves are going to get +2/+2, which is just very good. It's a way we can tap our guys and buff our entire field. Then we're going to have Ruby Medallion. We're playing mono red. Having our red spells cost 1 less is pretty good. So I'm not going to get too much into that. It's just a hard cost reducer. Sky Sovereign, console flagship. 5 mana, 6/5. Flying. When it attacks or enters the battlefield, it does 3 damage to a creature or a planeswalker an opponent controls. And it only has crew 3, which really isn't that bad. So just entering and attacking and bolting, like basically killing or hurting a creature or planeswalker, it's pretty good. Especially like when we can do that like every turn. Bolt a creature every turn. Smuggler's Copter, also known as the Looter's Scooter. 2 mana, 3/3 with flying with crew 1, which is fantastic. When it attacks or blocks, right? Big deal. You may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So quite literally, you loot with it, and it's very good. It's a 2 mana flying, like it's literally a 3/3 for 2 mana with evasion with only crew 1. That also loots. Very good. Soul Ring, it's Soul Ring. Not even going to talk about it. The Immortal Sun, 6 mana, legendary artifact. Right. This is just one of the ones we're gonna whip out into play and just like sacrificing 5 treasure. Players can't activate Planeswalker loyalty abilities. I don't know if we have any Planeswalkers. I can't remember. At the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card. It's just good card draw. Your spells cost 1 less, and creatures you control get +1/+1. So it's great. 4 ways. Hurts our opponents. We draw an extra card. Our spells cost less, and our creatures are stronger. The Immortal Sun is literally the kitchen sink. Treasure map. Let's look about it. Talk about it. Treasure map. 2 mana. Pay 1. Scry 1. And then you basically. So treasure map says pay 1, scry 1, put a landmark counter on it. When it has 3 or more of these counters, you make 3 treasures, and then you flip it over to Treasure Cove, which says sacrifice a treasure, draw a card, or, it's a land. I like this card. One, treasure map is just good, even when it's not flipped, because scrying at 1, like instant speed, is not that bad, especially for 1 mana, and especially if it's going to make us 3 treasures anyways. It also hard ramps us because you could look at it as we're investing the mana now just to get it back later. We could sacrifice a treasure to draw a card, which is great. So we could, basically right away, when it flips, the land will be tapped. It just is what it is. The land stays tapped. So the next turn, we're still going to have 3 mana to do it with. So we're still going to net gain that mana. It's very good. Gives us some mana, gives us some scries, and it gives us draws later on. Final 2 artifacts. Vanquisher's Banner, 5 mana. When it enters battlefield, you say dwarf. Dwarves get +1/+1, and whenever you cast a dwarf, draw a card. Now, I'm going to say it, but you could argue any of these cards, like Vanquisher's Banner or Obelisk Avert, or any of the ones that say choose a creature, you could argue and say vehicle. You could argue and say dragon, and they're both fine answers. But I'm saying dwarf just first and foremost because it's easiest. That's what we have the most of. And then we have the Weatherlight. Flying. Whenever the Weatherlight deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a historic card from them and put it in your hand, put the rest in the bottom. And historic cards are artifacts, legendaries, and sagas. We're not running any sagas. We're just straight up not. So it gets us more artifacts and it gets us legendary cards, which I don't think we have a ton of legendary creatures, but or legendary cards in general. But it does help us dig for more artifacts, and we have a lot of artifacts. We don't have many enchantments. Aggravated Assault, let's check it out. Untap all creatures you control. After this main phase, there's an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase. Activate this ability only anytime you could activate a sorcery. This card, if we have Magda, we have a way we can tap our guy. We have 5 guys, including Magda, all dwarves. Basically, if we have 6 guys, we technically go infinite. This card goes infinite because, again, it's going to tap all our creatures for only 5 mana. If we can tap 6 guys or so, we're always going to net gain 1 mana. That's now infinite colored mana. Well, it's not really infinite colored mana. It's infinite treasures, which gives us infinite colored mana. And Magda also says we can play all of the big dragons and artifacts from our deck. It's brutal. It's brutal. Blood Moon. We're mono red. We don't have many non-basics, and it's going to hurt our opponents way more than it's going to hurt us. Curse of Opulence. 1 mana is a very good curse cost. Enchant player, never us. Whenever enchanted player is attacked, create a gold token. It has sacrifice as artifact. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Each opponent attacking does the same thing. So it's not treasure. It isn't. But the way I look at this card is we're mono red, so we are aggressive. And if we can't get through to someone, let's say with our tiny creatures, then maybe someone can get through with their bigger creatures. Let's say we're going against like a control deck or a pillow fort deck, or maybe just like a big creature deck that they're gonna block and kill our stuff. It just gives them the incentive to attack. Chiron Negotiations. Didn't even know this card was a card until I started looking at the deck, but let's talk about it. 4 mana, tap an untapped creature you control. Chiron Negotiations deals 1 damage to target player. Now, it's not great. It's not great, but with dwarves, we're gonna want to tap our guys anyways. Like this is ideally every turn I see us basically completely tapping out. That's really how I view it. Every turn we're gonna completely tap out with our creatures so we can make treasure. And if this is just another outlet to do it, and we can like deal 1 damage, because crewing is good and all, but ultimately like it's not like the end all be all. Dealing 1 damage to target player, it's not great, but it's still fine. Molten Echoes, 4 mana. We're going to say dwarf probably. Whenever another creature, so whenever another non-token dwarf enters the battlefield under your control, make a copy of that creature. That token gains haste, exile it at the beginning of the next end step. The card's good because when we say dwarf, when we cast a dwarf, we're going to get a hasty one, and with that hasty dwarf, we can attack and it'll tap and we'll get the treasure anyways. Plus, it's just extra damage. So, boring part, lands. Inventor's Fair, I like it. At the beginning of your upkeep, if we control 3 or more artifacts, we gain a life. We're very artifact heavy and treasure heavy, so we will. We can tap it to add a mana, or we can pay 4, sacrifice it, search our library for an artifact card, reveal it, and put it into our hand, and then shuffle your library. Activate this only if we have 3 or more artifacts. So it is a land, it gains us a little bit of life every turn, but I like it because it's just an artifact tutor. Like 5 mana is heavy for artifact tutor. I know it says 4, but the way you have to evaluate these kinds of cards is, well, you're going to lose that mana that you could have gotten from tapping it. So it is essentially 5 mana ability. We're running 33 mountains. We are a pretty heavy mana, a lot of mana like in the deck. And this is mainly just because we have a lot of dwarves, which are low cost, but we don't want to get caught up on our high costed artifacts and dragons. So I put a little bit of extra mana in this deck just to like guarantee that even if the dwarf plan fails, we can still go on like the artifact and dragon plan. Nykthos, Shrine the Nyx, we're playing red, so or mono red, so we're pretty often going to have a lot of these like little nicks. Our devotion is going to be high anyways, so just being able to get even more is going to be good. Final lands, Valakut the Molten Pinnacle. So we're playing mono red. It's pretty much essential in mono red. Whenever a mountain comes into play under your control, if you control at least 5 other mountains, you may have Valakut the Molten Pinnacle deal 3 damage to target creature or player, and it just taps to add a red, which is good because we have 33 mountains, right? 33 mountains. That, what is that, potentially 99 damage, assuming like it all works out. Well, -5, so I guess it's going to be 95 minus 15 is going to be about 84 damage total. We could max out with that. I know it's not realistic, but just being able to play a land and be able to bolt something or someone is just still really good. And then we have War Room, which I like. It's a newer card. You tap it out of colors, or you could pay 3 mana, tap it, pay life equal to the number of colors in your commander's color identity, and draw cards. Draw a card. So basically, we're going to pay 3 mana, tap it, we're going to lose 1 life, and draw a card. That's really all that reads out to be, because Magda's only 1 color. Just some miscellaneous info. If you wanted to buy this deck outright on like TCG Player, that's how I priced it. It's going to be like about 630 bucks. The average CMC is exactly 2 when there's lands, because lands have the CMC of 0, and 3.19 average CMC without lands. So the deck's fairly low costed. It's just we don't want to be. This is the issue when you have decks with a lot of big mana, is we have a lot of lands because, yeah, a lot of our cards are going to be low-costed, but if we run smaller lands, we're never going to be able to hit our high-costed cards, and they're just going to be stuck in our hands. Finally, thank you guys for watching. Remember to subscribe to my channel, like the video, leave a comment, and talk to me about the deck. Tell me which one you want to do next. And the deck was requested and inspired by one of my subscribers, Insane Train HD. Thank you for telling me about the deck. It was a fun build, and I like making decks. So if you guys want me to make a deck, give you a little shout out, talk to me about the deck, I'd love to do it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.